Every year, I see students sabotage their grades in English without even realizing it. And it's not really because of a lack of effort, but it's actually down to the beliefs about English that really holds them back. And actually, I can boil it down to three main myths I tend to see a lot of GCSE English students believing in, then acting on, which ultimately leads them to sabotage their grades and really perform well below their potential. So I want to go over the three most common myths I've seen with students every single year in terms of the beliefs around English, and especially around GCSE English, but also I'm going to highlight why these myths are not only lies, but they are false, and if you believe in them, they will also hold you back. But of course, guys, I always talk about solutions. So of course, I'm also going to suggest what you can replace these beliefs with so that you can question them. When you even hear other students or your other peers talking about the same things, you can think, actually, no, I don't think that's true. And I'll also prove that this is wrong, okay? So guys, I'm gonna go over the three myths, and I'd like to suggest, as you're watching this, ask yourself, am I guilty of believing the same things? Have I sometimes fallen into the same thinking traps? And of course, as I said, guys, I'm all about solutions. So I'm also going to suggest what you should replace in terms of your belief instead, so that you can find, without making very much effort on your part in English, because if you're watching this video, you probably make a lot of effort already in English, but it's all about just now changing the way you think and the beliefs that you believe are true. I'm going to be deconstructing them a little bit, okay? So I'm going to go over the main three myths I hear students always say about English that are simply false and can actually sabotage your grades if you believe them. Number one, lots of students believe this, and in fact I get this all the time with my GCSE masterclass students when we're going over different language paper 1 and paper 2 examples, and I'm going over model answers, and they're like, oh my gosh, don't you need to pick out more techniques? Because they believe I must analyze every technique I see. When they see an extract from language paper 1 or 2 extracts in language paper 2, and then they see different language or structure techniques, they think when they're writing to get really amazing marks in English, they have to pick out a bunch of language techniques, a bunch of structure techniques, and comment on them. And this is a mistake, right? Because students who believe that they have to cram every single technique into their essay, this leads them to not only reduce their essay to a series of lists of techniques. Oh, there's a simile, then this metaphor. Oh, the writers use repetition, the writers use listing. But what happens is, if they try to cram every single technique that they can possibly find from an extract in their writing, what this leads to is shallow analysis. Their writing basically becomes a list, a grocery list even, of language and structure techniques, and that's not what your teachers are looking for. And ultimately, when you're doing your exams, that is not what your examiners are looking for. Your teachers do want to see techniques, okay? So don't get me wrong. Your teachers do want to see your language techniques or your structure techniques, depending on the question, but they don't want to see a bunch of different techniques and all you're doing is listing them. Instead, what you should be doing is focusing on fewer techniques per paragraph. In fact, what I always suggest to my students is, for each paragraph that you write, you want to write and add 1 to 2 techniques per paragraph. But then once you spotted the techniques, so say for example, you're answering a language question, then you spot a simile, then you zoom in on one particular word within that simile, and then you label it as either a noun, a dynamic verb, or whatever. What you then do is unpack that, analyze that, go into a deep dive when analyzing why did the writer use them? What ideas do these words and these techniques bring to our minds as readers? Why is it powerful? How is it supposed to change the atmosphere, the tone, the mood, and so on, okay? You achieve really great marks in English not by listing every single technique that you see and then cramming it into one paragraph, but instead focusing on fewer techniques, then doing a deep dive and deep analysis, okay? That's the first myth, which will hold you back in your essay if you approach every English essay that you write as a case of, I have to write as many techniques as I can in this essay just to show off that I know all of these language techniques that I've memorized and all of these structure techniques. That is not what your teacher is looking for. That is not what your examiner is looking for. They want to see deep diving and analysis, and this is achieved through fewer techniques, which you unpack in more detail. Now, the second myth that many students believe when it comes to English is paper 2 is easier than paper 1. This is to do with GCSE language, okay? So obviously remember that language paper 1 is where you get the one extract, and then you've got to answer 4 questions based on the fiction extract, and then you've got a creative writing question. And of course, paper 2 is where you have, in the same amount of time, 1 hour 45 minutes, to read 2 extracts, one of which is modern, non-fiction, and the other is Victorian. Then you've got to answer 4 questions based on these extracts. You've also got to write comparatively, and then you also write your own original article, letter, or speech based on a topical question. Now, for whatever reason, I'm not entirely sure why myself, but students over the years have always dismissed paper 2. They've always said, paper 2 is really easy, got that in the bag, it's super easy. It's paper 1 I really need to focus on. Paper 1, especially creative writing, I really need to make sure I get that right. So a lot of students always assume, and this is a huge myth and a massive mistake, because lots of students, especially on exam results day, they then find that they've done way worse in paper 2 than paper 1 because they went into revision and practice investing 80 to 90% of their time on paper 1. And if I'm being completely honest, of this 80 to 90% of effort and energy that students invest in paper 1, they then invest a further 80 to 90% on just creative writing. So a lot of students, when they're practicing for English, because they believe this myth, oh, paper 2 is super easy, I don't really need to put any effort into paper 2. They then put all of their energy and attention on paper 1. But actually, they don't even put it on all of paper 1. They invest literally 90% of their energy on creative writing. I need to get a really good descriptive writing question. I need to really perfect my story. And they focus 100% of their energy on what becomes a quarter of the entire thing. Because remember, guys, that paper 2 is worth 50% of the marks, and creative writing, which is in section B of paper 1, is worth a quarter of the overall marks you're going to get for language paper 1 and paper 2. This is a myth. This is going to be really destructive for your grade, and also it's not going to be a fair reflection of your efforts. Okay, so you're going to be spending all of this time revising and practicing, but you're focusing on the wrong thing and only a small slice of the whole pie. Instead, what you should do is, firstly, do not underestimate paper 2, okay? So a lot of students are like, oh, paper 2 is really easy. No, it's actually a bit more challenging, I would argue, because not only do you have to do double the reading in the same amount of time, because remember that in paper 2, you've got the 2 extracts, one of which is harder, it's a Victorian text, but also you've got to do double the writing, especially in question 2, where you have to infer and compare 2 sources, and then in question 4, where you also need to talk about writers' viewpoints and perspectives for the 2 sources. You're actually doing double the work, and paper 2 is a real test of your speed reading, speed writing, and equally it's a test of your comprehension skills, especially for source B, which is the Victorian source, and a lot of students do tend to struggle with that. And one of the things that I'm doing in my Sunday masterclasses currently, for 3 weeks, especially as we go over language, paper 2, as that's what we're currently focusing on, is I also have been creating 2026 exam style papers, which I've told all of my students, guys, in addition to what we're doing during the class, I'm going to be sending you another different paper 1 practice exam question every single week for the next 3 weeks, because your challenge is firstly to boost that comprehension, especially for source B. So I want them to get really good in reading and comprehending Victorian writing, but also applied practice. Okay, so that's myth number 2. It will hold you back if you literally ignore paper 2 or kind of put a little bit of effort, because paper 1 is really the hard one. No, you have to invest 50% of your time in paper 1 in terms of practice, and 50% of your time in paper 2 in terms of practice. Now, myth number 3, that if you believe this will definitely hold you back in English, is that you need to have natural talent to be good in English. I often hear students saying, oh, I'm really rubbish in English. I'm really rubbish in English. I'm so bad. I can definitely never get a 7. Or students that look at other students and say, oh, she got an 8 in English because she's clever. Oh, he's really clever. That's why he got a 7. No, that is a myth. It's a complete mistake to believe that you need to have natural talent in English. And students who get 6s, 7s, 8s and 9s just wake up, go into a test and then just do really well. English is a skill, not a talent. And things like speed reading and speed writing, people were not born knowing how to do this. This is over consistent practice over a certain period of time. This is actually usually over a long period of time. And also, remember, when it comes to English in terms of it being a skill, this is especially GCSE English, also you need to perfect the craft of paragraph writing, essay structure. This again is a skill. Students are not born knowing this. And ultimately, English is also a test of your ambitious vocabulary, the way you're able to express yourself using a range of vocabulary, opting for words like melancholic instead of sad, jovial instead of happy, right? And of course, also using a nice range and a nice mix of punctuation. This comes through practice, consistent effort, not just waking up one day, crossing your fingers, going into a test and hoping things will work out. And of course, in terms of how to overcome this belief, because people are not naturally talented in English, people who do well in English put in consistent practice, and this is exactly what you need to do. And if I'm being completely honest, guys, I've seen students who are on grade 2s and grade 3s and the teachers are like, nah, this student is definitely not really good in English. By changing this belief and by actually putting in that time, that effort, and letting go of this idea that I'm bad in English. Even students with learning difficulties and challenges around comprehending English, through consistent practice over a long period of time, not last minute cramming, they have ended up getting 6s, 7s, 8s and 9s. I've literally seen it for myself with my students in my master classes. So this is something that you can actually definitely improve on. And of course, as I said, guys, you don't have to figure this out by yourself. I do run weekly Sunday GCSE masterclasses for language paper 1 and paper 2. Everyone who's in that masterclass is on the road to getting 6s, 7s, 8s and 9s. These classes tend to be very interactive. They tend to be a vibe. And of course, also students who are part of that masterclass are also a real support system for each other, as well as obviously turning to me for feedback. And of course, in that live lesson, you can ask me as many questions as you want. So if you just need some inspiration, if you need perhaps also just a bit more guidance in terms of, okay, how can I start working on this, but also moving towards doing well and getting the grades that I deserve in English, of course, you're very welcome to join in. Thanks so much for listening.